I'd like to welcome you to this Artbite, which today is being presented from my home here in Christchurch. As you all know, the Christchurch Art Gallery is following the government's directives to close due to COVID-19. However, with the assistance of Tim Jones from the Christchurch Art Gallery and Nick, one of the front of house staff, we hope to bring you some information about this really lovely portrait which you can see here on screen. The artist is Douglas J Mcleod. He was born in 1906 and died in Christchurch in 1983. Simply called Self-Portrait, it's circa 1948. It's an oil on canvas on board, and the size is 330 millimeters by 430 millimeters. Just to give you a bit of an idea, I thought I would just cut this piece of cardboard to the actual size of the painting. On the gallery wall, of course, it's quite intimate, but I hope that that will get through to you just the actual scale of the work itself. It came into the collection in 1984 and was presented by Miss D Mcleod and Mrs. V.J. Roberts. Currently, the painting is on display upstairs at the Christchurch Art Gallery in the Burden Gallery. So if you go up the stairs and you were to turn immediately left and walk into the gallery space in front of you, this painting is immediately as you enter the space. The exhibition is called Persistent Encounters and is curated by one of the gallery curators, Ken Hall. Although highly talented and skilled, Douglas McLeod was to paint for little more than 2 decades. He ceased painting the year he painted this self-portrait in 1948. Ken Hall has partnered this particular painting with the only other work that's in the collection by this artist. It's called Portrait of the Artist's Wife, painted 2 years earlier in 1946. It's also an oil on canvas. It is the same dimensions, although the other painting is presented vertically rather than this work horizontally. The credit is the same, presented by the same 2 people I've just mentioned. On the text panel that's beside these 2 works, Ken has written, and I quote, "In this pair of uncompromisingly honest portraits, the subject's expressions speak of unsentimental observation and patient self-scrutiny. We are given an unexpectedly intimate glimpse into the lives of Christchurch-based artist Douglas Jackson McLeod and his wife Fanny. Douglas was born in Oamaru in 1906 and moved to Colgate the following year before they moved to Christchurch. When he was 6. He attended Richmond School and in 1920 enrolled at the Canterbury College of the Arts. Then, of course, this facility was in the buildings we now know as the Christchurch Arts Centre on the corner of Rolleston Ave and Hereford Street. He was to attend evening classes at the school 2 years later, and he was to go on and receive several prizes during his time of his training at art school. In 1924, he won the Mrs. Lonsdale Prize for Life and Head from Life, and 2 years later, in 1926, he won the Senior Evening Life Prize. Now, to give you some context here, who did Douglas study under? He studied with Archibald Nichol, Richard Woolwork, and Donald J Mackenzie, as well as Cecil Kelly and others. He was a contemporary of Rona Hazard and Russell Clark. Of course, some of you may be familiar with Rona Hazard, who developed a very substantial career and tragically died very young in her early 30s after leaving New Zealand and painting in Europe. Russell Clark another colleague at the time, well-known painter. And if you look at some of Russell Clark's exquisite drawings, you can see parallels certainly to Douglas McLeod's work. One can also see parallels to the portraits by one of his tutors, Archibald Nicholl. Training at this time was rigorous and based on a sound knowledge of mathematical structure and on one-point perspective, and at a time when muted impressionist style of realism was certainly encouraged. Daytime classes ran from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and evening classes from 7 to 9:30 p.m. If you look at Rona Hazard's publication by Joanna Drayton, there's some lovely comments made about how those live classes were for her at the time upstairs at the college. Third year students worked mostly from antiques, plaster casts of the figure. The life drawing room was the special privilege of fourth year students at this time. Also, they painted outdoors, plein air, in both the city and rural locations. And if we look at a number of artists around this time, there are scenes from Avon River, scenes of landscapes, often with built structures in them, and rural locations that took them a little bit further into Canterbury, if they had the transportation to do so. Sites such as brickworks and Cashmere were a popular destination, and here they could explore composition through pattern and design. Amongst McLeod's contemporaries was the painter James Cook, born 1904 and dies in his 50s in 1960. Their work showed stylistic similarities, finely executed and rich in detail. McLeod focused also on still life images, built structures, as well as what we have here, portraiture. Alongside his studies at the college in the 1920s, he worked in an advertising agency called Chandler and Company, designing stylish, modernist billboards, advertising a wide range of products including cars, cremota, pasteurised milk, and often using family members as models. He completed his art studies in 1926 and was employed full-time with Chancellor & Co. the following year. Of course, a lot of these billboards, many would not really have realised who designed them, and they were displayed across the country. And in a way, they're a sort of unknown quarter as to who actually executed these. In 1933, he became a working member of the Canterbury Society of Arts and exhibited in 1934, 1935 and 1936. And in the 1940s, he exhibited in Wellington at the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts. From our perspective, it's perhaps hard to imagine how important these exhibitions were. They were often... Tragically, his wife died in 1947, the year that he exhibited in Wellington at the New Zealand Academy. We don't really know the reasons why he stopped painting at this point. He continued to live in Christchurch up until 1983, the time of his death. The following year, in 1984, Neil Roberts, the then curator of the Rob McDougall Art Gallery, presented a focus exhibition titled Private and Public Douglas J Mcleod, which included 22 works, 3 pencil studies, 13 oils, 2 watercolours and 3 lino cuts. The small catalogue, black and white catalogue, included illustrations of 2 portraits, a very commanding portrait of Douglas with brush in hand. The oil hillside brick kiln, painted in 1936, was also illustrated alongside a really lovely lino cut of trees with dappled light. The catalogue also has complex detailed compositions is clearly evident in hillside brick kiln with its elevated perspective and where the sky has been removed. Archives on McLeod are held at in the library at the Christchurch Art Gallery, the Robert and Barbara Stewart Library and Archives. The other day when I was in there, I looked at this huge scrapbook of McLeod's, full of all sorts of articles and clippings, both local and from international magazines. A true treasure trove. Now I think let's have a little look at this portrait, and I just want to make some observations. Perhaps one of the strongest things that we have here is the way the portrait is cropped. I wonder, is it painted from a photograph? This is what it perhaps suggests to me. It's intimate, it's sharp in detail, and that detail would suggest that perhaps McLeod did work from photographs. Was painted when the artist was 42. If we look at the area in the lower right-hand side here, the canvas is showing through. Does it suggest that it's an unfinished work? Was Douglas happy that the painting existed at this level? He was probably aware and maybe very much influenced by a British artist called Sir William Orpin. His dates are 1878 to 1931, and he was a fine draftsman and a popular, commercially successful painter of portraits of well-to-do Edwardian people from the Edwardian Society in the UK. And he did paint many self-portraits. McLeod's portrait really has, I think, quite a contemporary feel. If we were to look at the colour, for example, there are very delicate creams and greys and fawns and reds throughout his head. The area around the eyes, for example, the eye on the right here shows an area of red, and we see that also on his lips. Notice that the mouth is slightly open and it exposes his teeth. If we look at the garments, maybe it's winter. He's wearing a jersey with a high collar. The green that's in the face is also appears in his shirt as it sticks up. And then further down, just in the t-shirt, is this little bright area of the painting. It's hard to see what's in the background. In some ways, perhaps not fully defined. It looks a little bit like some steps on the right-hand side. And one of the features I think that's strong here is the scale of the ear. Douglas is looking directly out at us, and there's a sense, I think, of quite a haunting stare. A sense of sadness, perhaps, melancholy. And perhaps there's a feeling that there's something a little bit uncomfortable here. I did know that several years ago, and in fact in 2007, the well-known New Zealand artist who resides in central Otago, Graham Sidney, was in visiting Neil Roberts, and Neil took him downstairs, and Graham was very excited to suddenly be presented with this portrait, and said he had to put the cup of tea on hold with Neil Roberts while he had a look at this work. Graham Sidney prides himself on being knowledgeable about New Zealand art, but like many, and like myself, unaware of this little jewel and gem that's in the collection. It's sad in a way we can't see the portrait of Fanny, Douglas's wife, which is, as I mentioned earlier, presented beside. So when the gallery does reopen, do take the opportunity to go in and spend some time with these two portraits. The pairing, in a way, seems pretty stunning, and says something collectively There is a real sense, I think, here for me that the portrait transcends time. And we all know for artworks to retain interest, there's got to be something there to look at and search out. And these two portraits certainly present that. So finally, I would just like to thank you all very, very much for listening to this, and we do hope that the gallery is not closed for too long. And I just would like to end my Artbite with this little sign that I made earlier this morning, and wish you all the best. Take care. Thank you very much.